is a room on the ground floor of the California Department of Healthcare Services building, B6 in Sacramento. We call it the Records Room. It has 8 rows of gray metal cabinets, and in one of those cabinets, there is a drawer marked B3. Inside that drawer, in a manila folder with a red ink stamp that reads, in 2 lines, Post-Emergency Review, Pending Window Closure, my preliminary memorandum sat for 48 months. I wrote it in May of 2022. It was pulled from the drawer in March of 2026 after a man named Paul Randall stood in front of a federal judge in Santa Ana and admitted that he had stolen $178 million from the Medi-Cal program of the state of California. I knew where that money went before the folder was ever placed in the drawer. My name is Lillian Castro. I am an auditor in the Medi-Cal Fraud Prevention Bureau of the California Department of Healthcare Services. Here is what happened during those 11 months when everyone was busy with the pandemic. I am 49 years old. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Land Park in Sacramento. I have lived in that apartment for 14 years. I have never been married. I do not have children. I have a cat named Shasta, who is 17 years old and mostly deaf, and who sleeps on a stack of printouts that I keep on the kitchen table. I grew up in Bakersfield. My mother, Rosalba Castro Ibarra, was born in Arandas, Jalisco in 1959 and came to the San Joaquin Valley with her parents in 1968 and spent most of her working life as a seasonal picker on table grape and stone fruit crews between Arvin and Wasco. My father, Hector Castro, was born on the south side of Bakersfield and served 18 months in the Mekong Delta as a young Army mechanic, and came home and took a job at a diesel shop on North Chester Avenue that he kept for 31 years. They spoke to me and to each other in a mixture of Spanish and English that belongs to my generation of the Central Valley and to no other place. My mother died of cervical cancer on the 23rd of March, 2011. She was 51 years old. Her oncologist at the University of California, San Francisco, had recommended a specialty regimen that required prior authorization under Medi-Cal. The prior authorization was denied twice. It was approved on the 3rd submission, 7 weeks after the first request. By the time the medication arrived at the infusion clinic in Fresno, her cancer had progressed beyond the window of useful response. She spent her last 4 months on a comfort protocol at my father's house on the south side of Bakersfield. I was working the palliative pharmacy overnight shift at the Los Angeles County University of Southern California Medical Center when she was dying. I drove up to Bakersfield every Friday after my shift ended at 7 in the morning, slept for 3 hours at my father's, sat with my mother from noon until she was tired, and drove back down Interstate 5 on Saturday night. She died on a Wednesday morning at 7:40. My father called me at the pharmacy. I was checking a doxorubicin bag at the counter. I finished the check. I walked outside and stood in the alley behind the medical center for 10 minutes. Then I went back inside and finished the shift because the patient who was going to get the doxorubicin needed it that afternoon. I tell you this because it is not background. It is the reason I understood what the Monte Vista Pharmacy data meant when I looked at it in May of 2022. I had worked in clinical pharmacy for 12 years. I trained at the University of Southern California School of Pharmacy. I completed a clinical residency at Los Angeles County University of Southern California in 2002. I spent 6 years on the palliative pharmacy night shift. I know what a dispensing log looks like when it is honest. I know what a dispensing log looks like when it is lying. I can read a billing run the way a musician reads a score. That is not a skill anyone taught me in any class. That is what you learn in your hands over 12 years of standing in front of a counter, counting pills into amber bottles, matching them against a prescription, checking and double-checking because the person at the other end of the bottle is going to take the drug. I pivoted to state audit work in 2012. I was 34 years old. I applied to the California Department of Healthcare Services for a senior pharmacist auditor position in the Medi-Cal Program Integrity Division. I had decided, after my mother's death, that I could not stand at the counter anymore. I was tired of approving medication for people who had already waited too long. I wanted to work on the upstream side of the problem. I wanted to look at the patterns that determined who got which drug at which price and why. I was hired in April of 2012. I moved from Los Angeles to Sacramento, bought a used Toyota Camry, found the apartment in Land Park, and reported to Building B6 on a Monday morning in May. I have been in that building for 14 years. The division I work in is called Medi-Cal Fraud Prevention Bureau. We are a subunit of the larger Program Integrity Division. There are about 220 employees in the Bureau, split across 5 satellite offices. The Sacramento office has 70 of us. Our job is to examine the claims paid by Medi-Cal, which is the state Medicaid program of California, and to identify patterns that suggest fraud. We run queries against the claims warehouse. We pull data in batches. We write reports. When a pattern crosses a certain threshold, we escalate to the State Controller's Office and to the California Department of Justice, and in some cases, to the Federal United States Department of Health and Human Services Office of the Inspector General. Most of what we find is not dramatic. Most of what we find is a dentist who billed for a crown that was actually a filling, or a small group home that double-charged Medi-Cal and the family of the beneficiary, or a durable medical equipment company that marked up wheelchairs by 200%. You chase those things, you document, you refer. Then you go to the next one. The supervisor of my work unit in May of 2022 was a man named Gregor Hanneman. He was 58 years old then. He had come to the state agency in 1999, in the last year of the Gray-Davis administration, and he had survived the transition to Schwarzenegger, and the transition to Brown, and the transition to Newsom. He had been promoted 5 times, always slowly, always on time, always in the shape of the department as it actually existed. He had never taken the test for assistant director. He had never wanted to. He was what we called, privately and without malice, a system survivor. He knew which memoranda were going to be read and which were going to be filed. He knew which units were going to be consolidated and which were going to be protected. He was not a bad man. He was not a corrupt man. He was a man who had learned, over 2 decades and change, that you do not move faster than the building. My colleague across the cubicle wall, for most of those years, was a woman named Margaret Ong Tibbetts. She was 61 by the time I left Sacramento. She had come to the department in 1997 as an associate programmer analyst and had worked her way up to senior data specialist. She wrote most of the original SAS queries that the Bureau used in the 2010s. She was patient and exact, and, when she thought no one was looking, funny. She and I had shared a stapler for most of the 14 years I spent in that cubicle because the one she had brought from home in 1997 had worn out in 2015, and I had given her mine, and we had never bothered to untangle the arrangement. The 4th person I need to name is Ashanti Bermudez Yoon. Ashanti came to the Department of Healthcare Services in 2017 as one of 4 deputy general counsels. Her background was federal prosecution. She had spent 9 years in the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of California before joining the state. Her office was on the 4th floor of Building B6. I had worked with her on 3 or 4 unrelated matters over the years. Small things, a question about how far back we could pull dental claims for a particular line of inquiry, a question about how to preserve an email chain from a subcontracted managed care plan. I trusted her. She struck me as the kind of lawyer who preferred a narrow answer to a broad answer, because a narrow answer held. I need to tell you about a regulation that was in place in the state of California from May of 2020 to May of 2023. It is going to matter. The COVID-19 pandemic began, for our purposes, in the middle of March of 2020. On the 21st of April, 2020, the California Department of Healthcare Services issued an emergency rulemaking under its authority under Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 14105.22, which permits emergency regulation in the event of a declared state of emergency. Among other things, that rulemaking temporarily suspended the prior authorization requirement for a defined list of specialty pharmaceutical products dispensed through the Medi-Cal Rx program. The intent was good. Too many patients were having their chronic therapies delayed or interrupted because the prior authorization review workflow at the state contractor had collapsed under the administrative weight of the early pandemic. The suspension was renewed every 6 months. It was finally allowed to expire on the 1st of May, 2023. From April 22nd of 2020 through April 30th of 2023, no prior authorization was required for those specialty products. A prescription written by a California licensed prescriber and dispensed by a Medi-Cal-enrolled pharmacy to a Medi-Cal-enrolled beneficiary was paid automatically. There was, during those 3 years, only one backstop. That backstop was the post-payment audit. That was my division. On a Monday morning in early May of 2022, I was running our standard monthly outlier report against the Medi-Cal Rx Claims Warehouse. The outlier report is a SAS procedure that Margaret wrote in 2014 and that I had modified and refined 3 times since. It computes, for every Medi-Cal enrolled pharmacy in the state, the dispensing volume for specialty products in the prior month in dollars paid. It computes the statewide median. It flags any pharmacy whose dispensing volume exceeds 5 times the median. In the months before May of 2022, the outlier list usually had between 8 and 15 pharmacies on it. Most of them were large hospital outpatient pharmacies, or specialty pharmacies attached to large health systems, or a small number of independents that specialized in hepatitis C and human immunodeficiency virus therapies. We recognized most of the names on the list. We had working relationships with most of them. When one of them showed up, we would often make a phone call and ask a question, and usually there was a readable answer. In May of 2022, the outlier list had 23 pharmacies on it. 19 of them I recognized. 3 of the new ones were specialty pharmacies that had recently opened in Los Angeles and Alameda counties, attached to new oncology groups, and their billing curves looked plausible. The 23rd pharmacy was called Monte Vista Pharmacy. The address was in Orange, California. The National Provider Identifier number was new. The Medi-Cal enrollment had occurred on the 17th of February, 2022. The dispensing volume for the prior month was $4,900,000. The statewide median was about $9,700. Monte Vista had billed Medi-Cal for specialty products at approximately 500 times the statewide median pharmacy volume. It had done so in its 3rd month of operation as a Medi-Cal enrolled provider. It had done so from a storefront in Orange County. I looked at that row on the output for a long time. Then I pulled the details. I ran the per drug breakdown. I ran the per prescriber breakdown. I ran the per beneficiary breakdown. The prescriber breakdown showed that 78% of all Monte Vista prescriptions in April of 2022 had been written by 4 prescribers. One was a nurse practitioner named Patricia Anderson. She had issued 1,100 prescriptions in that month through a nurse practitioner authority. The other 3 were physicians based in Orange County. None of the 4 prescribers had issued any prescriptions to Monte Vista before April of 2022. The beneficiary breakdown showed that 63% of the beneficiaries billed were flagged in our cross-reference against the Medi-Cal Managed Care Beneficiary Eligibility System. Some of the flags were minor, some were not. 14% of the claims had either a mismatch on date of birth between the pharmacy claim and the eligibility file, or a mismatch on the Medi-Cal Beneficiary Identification Number. 14%. On that volume, that was not a data quality issue, that was something else. I pulled the Cures 2.0 cross-reference. The California Controlled Substance Utilization Review and Evaluation System, called Cures, is the state prescription drug monitoring program. It contains, in principle, every controlled substance prescription dispensed in California. It is not supposed to contain non-controlled specialty products of the kind Monte Vista was billing. But it does track several of them, because several of them are Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, and because several more are in practice tracked under the broader specialty pharmacy oversight that the legislature layered into Cures in 2018. The Monte Vista Cures cross-reference was useful to me. It showed that for approximately 900 of the specialty prescriptions that Monte Vista had billed in April of 2022, there was no corresponding controlled substance prescription entry. For some classes of products, that was expected. For other classes, it was not. I made a note. That same morning, I drafted an initial memorandum. It was 1 page. I outlined the outlier flag, the prescriber concentration, the beneficiary mismatch rate, and the cures discrepancies. I flagged Monte Vista for a priority audit. I walked the memorandum to Gregor Hanneman's office. His door was partly open. I knocked. He said, "Come in." I sat down in the chair opposite his desk. I put the memorandum on the desk, facing him. He read it. He read it slowly. He scratched his chin. He put the memorandum down. He said, "Lillian, what is your recommendation?" I said, "Gregor, I want to open a priority audit on Monte Vista. I want to pull the full claims history, the cures history, the prescriber registration history, and the enrollment application. I want to request field records from the Board of Pharmacy on the Monte Vista pharmacist in charge. I want to have something to show the state controller by the end of August." Gregor said, "Lillian, I hear you. I am going to ask you to hold on this for a minute." He paused. He said, "It is May of 2022. We are still in the COVID emergency posture. The prior authorization suspension is still in place. I cannot move something like this up the chain right now. It is going to look to the assistant director like we are picking on a pharmacy that was serving beneficiaries during an emergency. I do not want to put the Bureau in that position. I want you to hold this as a pending review. When the emergency is lifted, we will bring it forward, and at that point, we will have a clean framing, and we will have the full 12 months of claims history, and we will have a much stronger case." I said, "Gregor, they have billed $5 million in 1 month. If this is what it looks like in another 6 months, they will have billed $40 million. Gregor said, "Lillian, I hear you. We will watch them. If the number doubles, we will revisit." I sat in that chair for a second. Then I picked up my memorandum. I walked back to my cubicle. I put the memorandum in the lower right drawer of my desk. I did not tell Margaret. I sat down. I looked at my dual monitors. The Pearl output was still on the left-hand screen. The outlier row for Monte Vista was still highlighted. I reached over and closed the window. That was the first time. Here is what I did not do. I did not argue with Gregor. I did not send an email to the assistant director. I did not file a separate internal complaint. I did not call the office of the state controller. I did not call anyone outside the department. I am a senior civil servant in a career service position. The California State Personnel Board rules are not ornamental. If you go around your supervisor, you have to have a clean legal reason to do it. Gregor's instruction was not illegal. It was not even plainly unreasonable. It was, on its face, a decision about timing. I had no immediate legal basis to override him. What I had was a statistical pattern that I believed, and a career judgment that said this pattern would become worse before it became better. I held the memorandum in the drawer. I watched. The number did double. It doubled by July. Monte Vista billed $9,600,000 for specialty products in June of 2022. The July number was $10,400,000. By August, the monthly number had stabilized around $11 million. I brought the updated numbers to Gregor in the first week of September. He looked at them. He said, "Lillian, these are real numbers. I agree with you that this needs to move. Write it up. I want to see a preliminary report by the end of the month." I wrote the preliminary report in the second half of September. It was 48 pages. The body of the report covered the outlier detection methodology, the month-by-month growth, the prescriber concentration pattern, the beneficiary mismatch rate, the cures discrepancy analysis, and a set of attached exhibits pulling representative claims for examination. The exhibits included 78 specific claim-level records. For a subset of those, I had pulled the underlying billing documentation that Medi-Cal Rx held on file. For several, there was no matching pharmacy dispensing log entry that I could verify. I noted it. I did not speculate. I submitted the report on the 29th of September. Gregor acknowledged receipt. He said he would read it over the weekend. I went home on Friday evening. I sat on my couch. I drank a glass of boxed white wine. I petted Shasta. On Monday morning, Gregor called me into his office. He had the report on his desk. The first page had a red ink stamp on it. The stamp read in 2 lines, "Post-emergency review, pending window closure." He said, "Lillian, this is excellent work. I am placing it in the pending review file. As soon as the emergency posture is lifted, which I expect will be no later than the end of the fiscal year, we will bring this forward through the proper chain. It is going to be a strong referral. You did good work." I said, "Gregor, it will not be the end of the fiscal year. The emergency is going to be renewed. It has been renewed twice already." Gregor said, "Lillian, trust me on this one. You know I have been here a long time. These things have a shape. When they break fast." I took the report back to my desk. I did not put it in the drawer. I scanned it at the copier. I encrypted the scan to a USB drive. I took the USB drive home and placed it in a small metal box in the closet of my apartment. The next morning, I walked the paper copy to the records room on the ground floor of Building B6. I filed it in drawer B3, which was the drawer reserved for Medi-Cal RX pending matters. The manila folder in which it sat was blank on the outside. The red stamp was only visible if you opened the folder. That was the second time. In January of 2023, I had my annual performance review. I sat in Gregor's office for 40 minutes. He walked me through my numerical evaluations. He said I had done solid work during a challenging regulatory period. He said the Bureau appreciated my discipline during the pandemic posture. He gave me an overall score of 4.6 on a 5-point scale. He said he intended to recommend me for a step increase, effective the 1st of April. I thanked him. I walked back to my cubicle. 2 days later, I walked past the records room on my way to the printer, and I looked through the glass door at drawer B3. My folder was still there. The COVID emergency rulemaking had just been renewed for another 6 months, until the end of June. That morning, the Monte Vista outlier row had crossed $100 million in cumulative billed volume since February of 2022. Medi-Cal had paid approximately 65% of that. I sat in my cubicle. I looked at the Pearl output. I understood at that moment with complete clarity what Gregor's praise had been. It was not a lie. It was not a trap. It was not corruption. It was a lock. He had put my work in a drawer, and he had praised me, and the praise was the wire that held the drawer shut. He was not going to move the report. He was not going to move it in June. He was not going to move it in December. He was going to move it when the building moved and not before, because that is how Gregor had survived 24 years. I realized, sitting at my cubicle at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday in late January of 2023, that if I waited for the building to move, Medi-Cal would pay $300 million, and Monte Vista would still be billing. I do not want to romanticize what I did next. It was not a decision of moral courage. It was a technical, procedural decision made after 3 weeks of thinking. I had studied the relevant provisions of the California Civil Service Act and the State Personnel Board rules. I had read the relevant guidance on the California Whistleblower Protection Act. I had read the relevant provisions of Government Code Section 8547, which governs protected disclosures by state employees. I had concluded that if I went around Gregor through the operational chain, I would be in breach of Section 19572 of the Government Code, which covers insubordination. I could be disciplined. I could be dismissed. The dismissal would probably be reversed on appeal, but the appeal would take 2 years, and during those 2 years, the Monte Vista number would keep growing. What I needed was a path that did not go through the operational chain. I knocked on Ashanti Bermudez Yoon's door on a Thursday in the first week of February 2023. Her office is on the 4th floor. She waved me in. I sat down. I said, "Ashanti, I have a procedural question." She said, "All right." I said, "If a bureau auditor identifies a pattern that she believes may, on the evidence, constitute fraud against the state of California in the amount of tens of millions of dollars, and if the operational supervisor has placed the auditor's preliminary report in a pending review queue, and if the auditor has reason to believe the queue is not going to clear in a reasonable time frame, does the auditor have a legal obligation to escalate through general counsel?" Ashanti looked at me for a long time. She said, "Lillian, are you asking me a hypothetical?" I said, "Ashanti, I am asking you a question about the structure of the obligation." She said, "Lillian, do you have evidence?" I said, "Ashanti, I have a 48-page preliminary report supported by 112 pages of exhibits that is sitting in drawer B3 of the records room. If you want it, I will bring it up to you this afternoon." She said, "Lillian, bring it up to me this afternoon." I brought it up to her at 2 in the afternoon. I waited in her office while she read it. She read for about an hour. Then she said, "Lillian, I am going to write a memorandum to the California Attorney General's Office, Special Prosecutions Unit. I am going to frame it as a referral from the Department of Healthcare Services, Office of General Counsel, on the authority of Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 14107. I am going to attach your report as Exhibit A. I am not going to name you as the author in the cover memo. I am going to describe the work product as the product of the Medi-Cal Fraud Prevention Bureau. That is a technically accurate description, and it protects your position. The Attorney General's Office will, in the ordinary course, request an interview with the Bureau Auditor most familiar with the analytical methodology. When that happens, the agency will designate you. At that point, you will have a legal, procedurally clean conversation. Is that acceptable to you?" I said, "Ashanti, that is acceptable to me." She said, "Lillian, you do not have to do this." I said, "Ashanti, I do." The memorandum went out on the 14th of February, 2023. 3 weeks later, I received an email from an assistant in the Special Prosecutions Unit requesting an interview with the Bureau Auditor responsible for the Monte Vista review. The agency designated me. I went to the State Justice Building on the 16th of March. I met with 2 Deputy Attorneys General and an investigator. I walked them through the methodology. I answered their questions. I gave them a clean copy of the report and a set of exhibits. The meeting lasted 4 hours. At the end, the senior deputy said, "Ms. Castro, thank you. We will be back in touch." I drove home. I ate a peanut butter sandwich standing at the kitchen counter. I went to sleep at 9. The California Attorney General's Office referred the Monte Vista matter to the United States Department of Justice, Central District of California, in August of 2023. The referral was made because the relevant federal interests, including the federal share of Medi-Cal funding, the interstate wire transfer pattern of the payments, and the probable federal offenses involved, exceeded the state prosecutorial frame. I learned about the federal referral through Ashanti in late August. She told me that a Deputy Assistant United States Attorney in the Central District was going to want an in-person meeting with the author of the underlying analysis, and that the agency would again designate me, and that I should expect a request in October or November. The request arrived on the 20th of October. The meeting was scheduled for the 7th of November at the Santa Ana Federal Building. I drove down on the 6th. I stayed at a Courtyard by Marriott in Orange. The pharmacy was approximately a mile and a half from the hotel. I did not go to it. I ate dinner at a chain Italian restaurant on Catella Avenue. I slept badly. On the morning of the 7th, I put on the navy suit I had bought in 2008 for a cousin's wedding and had worn 3 times in 16 years. I drove to the Federal Building. I went through security. I checked in at the reception desk of the United States Attorney's Office. I sat in a waiting area for about 20 minutes. The Assistant United States Attorney came out and introduced himself. His name was Benjamin Ochoa Stromberg. He was 43 years old. He was a career prosecutor. He took me back to a conference room. There were 2 other attorneys in the room, and an FBI forensic accountant and a paralegal. There was a long wooden table and a pitcher of water and glasses. I sat down. I took the 212-page dossier out of my briefcase and placed it on the table. I had prepared that dossier in the evenings over the previous 6 weeks. It contained my original 48-page preliminary report, updated through the end of September of 2023. It contained an additional 89 pages of anomaly tables that I had built out since the original submission, including the prescriber concentration analysis extended through the most recent available quarter and the beneficiary identification mismatch analysis, and a month-by-month trajectory of the Monte Vista billing volume. It contained 47 pages of Cures 2.0 cross-reference documentation. It contained 32 pages of prescriber pattern analysis on Patricia Anderson, identifying the timing of her enrollment as an authorized prescriber at Monte Vista relative to her other credentialing. It contained a 44-page statistical methodology appendix that walked through the underlying SAS procedures. I had printed the dossier at a FedEx office on J Street in Sacramento on a Tuesday evening because I did not want it printed on state equipment. I had paid for the printing in cash. The dossier was in a 3-ring binder. It weighed a little under 4 pounds. Benjamin Ochoa Stromberg looked at the binder. He said, "Ms. Castro, thank you. I have read your original report. I have some questions." He asked questions for 3 hours and 45 minutes. The forensic accountant asked additional questions for another 40 minutes. I answered as precisely as I could. I said, "I do not know when I did not know." At the end, Ochoa Stromberg said, "Ms. Castro, this is going to take time. I need you to understand that. We will not be able to give you any updates. Grand jury confidentiality is absolute. If you are contacted again, it will be because we need additional technical assistance, and it will be narrow, and it will be specific, and you will not know the posture of the investigation. Do you understand?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have any questions?" I said, "No." He said, "Go home, Ms. Castro. Thank you." I drove home. I took Interstate 5 north. The drive is about 7 hours. I stopped once in Kettleman City for gasoline and a bottle of water. I arrived at my apartment at 1 in the morning. Shasta was asleep on the back of the couch. I ate a piece of cold pizza out of the refrigerator. I went to bed. Between the 7th of November 2023 and the 3rd of October 2024, I did not have a single communication from anyone at the United States Attorney's Office, or from the FBI, or from the California Attorney General's Office about the Monte Vista matter. I had communications from Ashanti on unrelated matters, perhaps once every 6 weeks. None of those communications mentioned Monte Vista. I kept my clearance for the dossier active. I continued to run the monthly outlier reports. Monte Vista remained on the list through the end of April of 2023, when the COVID emergency rulemaking finally expired and the prior authorization requirement was reinstated. The billing volume collapsed immediately. In May of 2023, Monte Vista billed Medi-Cal for approximately $72,000. By July, they had billed nothing. In November of 2023, the Medi-Cal enrollment status for Monte Vista was changed from active to inactive, and in March of 2024, it was terminated for cause, without explanation. I watched these changes happen in the claims warehouse. I did not mention them to anyone. During those 18 months of silence, I continued my other work. I audited a chain of home infusion providers in the Inland Empire for inappropriate billing of parenteral nutrition. I audited a small, durable medical equipment supplier in Eureka for upcoding. I audited a hospice operator in San Diego County for improper discharge and readmission cycling. I identified, referred, and helped secure recoveries totaling approximately $16 million across those 3 matters during the silence period. None of them were Monte Vista. None of them approached the Monte Vista number. They were the ordinary work. I went home every evening. I fed Shasta. I ate simply. On weekends, I drove out to the Sacramento River and walked. In the spring of 2024, I started a small container garden on the concrete patio behind my apartment. I grew tomatoes, Thai basil, and a single Meyer lemon tree in a blue glazed pot. My father called me on the first Sunday of every month. He was 78. He had retired from the diesel shop in 2011. He lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house on the south side of Bakersfield in which I had grown up. He still tended the zinnias my mother had planted along the west fence in 1993. He did not ask me about my work. He asked me about the garden. He asked me whether I had eaten. He asked me when I would come down. I went down twice a year, for 4 days each time, in April and in October. On the 3rd of October, 2024, I received a telephone call at my desk at Building B6 from a woman who identified herself as Gwendolyn Iskandar Pol. She said she was a forensic certified public accountant assigned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Squad in Santa Ana. She said she had been tasked with a technical consult on billing methodology for an active matter. She did not name the matter. She asked if I could be available for a 25-minute telephone conversation about Medi-Cal RX specialty product billing workflows. I said yes. We spoke for 28 minutes. She asked about the data architecture of the claims warehouse, about the delay between claim submission and payment adjudication, about the typical audit trail retention periods, and about the Cures 2.0 cross-reference. I answered precisely. At the end, she thanked me. She said, "Ms. Castro, we may not be in touch again." She said, "But I wanted you to know that the work is ongoing." Her voice was neutral. I thanked her. I hung up. I understood. I did not tell anyone. In late January of 2025, I was informed by the bureau director that the Medi-Cal Fraud Prevention Bureau was being reorganized. 4 of the 5 satellite offices, including the Sacramento office, were being consolidated into 3. Staff in affected units would be redeployed according to skill and seniority. I was informed that my position was being shifted to the Fresno satellite office effective the 1st of May. The bureau director framed the move as a lateral transfer with a small increase in per diem on the theory that housing costs in Fresno were lower than in Sacramento. My seniority, benefits, and step increase were preserved. The move was described as a career mobility opportunity. I understood what it was. I said thank you. I did not protest. I spent February and March looking for an apartment in Fresno. I found a small 1-bedroom on the west side of Fresno, off Palm Avenue, about 4 miles from the satellite office. The rent was $1,200 a month. I signed a year lease. I boxed up my Sacramento apartment in the first 2 weeks of April. On the 29th of April, 2025, I went to Building B6 for the last time as a Sacramento-based employee. I want to tell you about that last day because it matters to what came after. I arrived at 7 in the morning. My cubicle had been packed into 4 banker's boxes, which I had labeled with a black marker the night before. The boxes were stacked on the floor behind my desk. I had 2 monitors on the desk, still connected. Margaret came in at 8. She sat at her cubicle across the wall. She said, "Lillian, this is going to be strange." I said, "Margaret, it is going to be strange." She said, "Lillian, let me help you carry the boxes down." I said, "Margaret, thank you." We sat in silence for another half hour. I ran the final monthly outlier report. I reviewed 3 pending matters and wrote handoff notes for each to my replacement in Sacramento, a younger auditor named Roderick Arnez Thielen. I filed them in a shared folder. I deleted my personal files from the state server. I turned off my computer. At 9:30, I walked the boxes down to my car, 2 at a time, with Margaret helping. The parking structure was half empty because most people were still at their desks. We put the boxes in the trunk of the Camry. Margaret said, "I am going to miss you, Lillian." I said, "I am going to miss you too, Margaret." We walked back up to the 4th floor. I went to Ashanti's office to say goodbye. Ashanti hugged me. She said, "Lillian, take care of yourself." She said, "You did the right thing." I did not answer. I walked back down to my cubicle. Gregor Hanneman was standing near my desk, waiting. He said, "Lillian, I am sorry to see you go." He said, "Fresno is going to be good for you." He said, "You have always been one of our strongest analysts, and I know you will bring that to the new posting." I said, "Thank you, Gregor." He offered his hand. I shook it. He walked back to his office. The last thing I did at my cubicle was return the stapler. Margaret had brought that stapler from her home office on Castro Street in Mountain View in September of 1997. She had given it to me in 2015 when the spring on her own had broken. She had said, "Lillian, you keep this one. I will get a new one for home." She had never gotten a new one. The stapler had sat on my desk for 10 years. It was a 1970s model an olive drab swingline heavy-duty with a manufacturer's sticker half peeled from the underside. I reached across the cubicle wall. I placed the stapler on Margaret's desk. I said, "Margaret, I am returning your stapler." She looked at it. She said, "Lillian, that is my stapler." She said, "I had forgotten about that stapler." She said, "Thank you." I left Building B6 at 10:45 in the morning on the 29th of April, 2025. I drove south on Interstate 5 to Fresno. I took possession of the new apartment on the 1st of May. I reported to the Fresno satellite office at 8 in the morning on Monday the 5th. The office was on the second floor of a state building near Fresno Street. My new cubicle was smaller than the Sacramento one. My window looked west across the Central Valley, toward Kerman and Mendota, and eventually, if you could see that far, Coalinga. On clear days in the summer, you can see the Coast Range in silhouette from that window. I liked the light in that cubicle. I liked the quiet. On the 12th of October, 2025, I was in the break room at the Fresno satellite office, pouring a cup of coffee. The television mounted in the corner was set to a cable news channel. A banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Federal indictment unsealed in $270 million Medi-Cal pharmacy fraud scheme." The image on the screen was the front of the Santa Ana Federal Building. I poured the coffee slowly. I walked back to my cubicle. I sat down. I pulled up the Department of Justice press release on my work computer. It named 3 defendants. Paul Allen Randall, age 66, of Orange, California, owner of Monte Vista Pharmacy, LLC. Carolus Ramses Mikhail, age 54, of Fullerton, California, pharmacist in charge of Monte Vista Pharmacy. Patricia Joan Anderson, age 57, of Long Beach, California, nurse practitioner. The indictment alleged wire fraud, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, payment of illegal kickbacks to prescribers, and money laundering. The aggregate billed volume was stated as approximately $270 million, of which approximately $178 million had been paid by Medi-Cal and the federal Medicaid share prior to the identification of the scheme. The press release stated that the investigation had been initiated following an anomaly detection referral from the California Department of Healthcare Services in 2023, conducted jointly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, and the California Department of Justice, with the technical assistance of the California Department of Healthcare Services Medi-Cal Fraud Prevention Bureau. The press release did not name me. I read the press release twice. I closed the window. I took a sip of the coffee. It had gotten cold. I called my father that evening. I did not tell him about the indictment. He was watching a San Joaquin Valley Agriculture Weekly program on the local public television affiliate. He told me his zinnias had bloomed well this year, despite the heat in August. I told him I was glad. Over the following several weeks, I watched the case proceed through the public docket. I did not discuss it with anyone at the Fresno satellite office. Nobody at Fresno knew I had been involved. Pre-trial motions continued through the end of 2025. In January of 2026, the first of the 3 defendants entered plea negotiations. I learned later that the negotiations had been with Patricia Anderson first, and that she had agreed to a cooperation agreement. Carolus Mikhail entered his own plea negotiations in February. On the 1st of March of 2026, Paul Randall's attorneys advised the court that their client would enter a change of plea. On the 6th of April, 2026, at 10 in the morning Pacific Time, Paul Allen Randall stood in the United States District Court for the Central District of California in Santa Ana before the Honorable Marguerite Castagneta and entered a plea of guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The maximum sentence on the count was 30 years. The sentencing was scheduled for the 3rd of August. Mikhail and Anderson had already entered their own pleas. Mikhail pled to 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and 1 count of making a false statement to a federal agency. Anderson pled to 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, cooperating. The case was, for most practical purposes, complete. I saw the news item on the morning of the 7th of April in the Sacramento Bee because I still had a digital subscription to the Sacramento paper from when I had lived in Sacramento, and I read the morning edition on my tablet at my kitchen table before I drove to the office. The article was 3 paragraphs long and ran on page A9. The headline was, "Federal Guilty Plea in $270 million Medi-Cal Pharmacy Scheme." The article repeated the Department of Justice language about the initial anomaly detection referral. It did not name me. I read the article. I drank my coffee. I put the tablet in my bag. I fed Shasta. I drove to the office. I worked on an audit of a medical supplier in Visalia that had been improperly billing for oxygen concentrators. I left at 5. I drove home. I watered the garden. In the 3rd week of April, I received a letter at the Fresno satellite office. It was a plain white envelope with a return address in a state of California letterhead. The letter inside was on California Department of Justice stationery. It was signed by the chief of the Special Prosecutions Unit and countersigned by a Deputy Attorney General whom I recognized from the meeting in March of 2023. The letter said, in substance, that the state of California recognized and valued the work I had contributed to the development of the Monte Vista Pharmacy investigation, and that the Department of Justice, while unable to publicly acknowledge the contribution of specific state employees, given the underlying ongoing criminal matter and the confidentiality ordinarily afforded to grand jury proceedings, wished privately to express its appreciation. The letter did not offer a monetary award. The letter did not offer a change in assignment. The letter did not offer a public acknowledgement. The letter was, on its own terms, a piece of correspondence. I read it once. I placed it in the 3rd drawer of my desk, underneath an unopened package of legal pads. I want to tell you about the people in this story who did not come out well, because I do not want you to think this was only Paul Randall's story. Kyrillos Ramses Mikhail was born in Alexandria, Egypt in 1972. He came to California with his family in 1998. He graduated from the University of Southern California School of Pharmacy in 2003. He spent the first 15 years of his career at a chain community pharmacy in Anaheim. He was, by the account of his former colleagues, a careful and competent pharmacist. In 2019, at a different workplace, he had been the subject of a Board of Pharmacy disciplinary action involving discrepancies in a dispensing log. The matter had been resolved with a 2-year probation and a reinstatement requirement. His license had been restored in full in December of 2021. He had joined Monte Vista Pharmacy as pharmacist in charge in February of 2022, 2 weeks after his probation lifted. I do not know exactly how Paul Randall found him. I suspect it was through a pharmacist recruiting network. He had a 21-year-old daughter, Sarah Mikhail Rose, who was a junior at the University of California, Irvine. She has told a newspaper reporter that she had no knowledge of her father's scheme. I believe her. Patricia Joan Anderson grew up in Long Beach. She trained as a registered nurse in 1988 and completed her nurse practitioner certification in 2008. She worked for 12 years at a Memorial Care urgent care clinic in Long Beach. In 2021, her husband, Donald Anderson, lost his job as a manufacturing supervisor at a Boeing facility in El Segundo when Boeing closed the facility. The family had a mortgage on a modest ranch house in Long Beach, 2 children in community college, and approximately $64,000 in credit card debt. Patricia joined the Monte Vista scheme in May of 2022, approximately 6 weeks after Boeing closed her husband's facility. She signed each prescription because Paul Randall paid her $100 per prescription. She signed more than 11,000 prescriptions between May of 2022 and April of 2023. The kickback totaled approximately $1.1 million. She used the money to pay down the credit card debt, to cover her mortgage, and to keep her younger daughter in school. She cooperated with the federal investigation. In her interviews, she said she had known the prescriptions were wrong by June. She said she had kept signing them because she did not see a way out. I will not defend her conduct. I will also not pretend I do not understand it. Paul Randall is a different person. I have read most of the public filings in his case. He worked at Wyeth Pharmaceuticals as a regional sales representative from 1988 to 2007. When Pfizer acquired Wyeth in 2009, he moved into a managed care analyst role at a different pharmaceutical benefit manager, where he stayed until 2019. He knew the billing architecture of specialty pharmacy from the inside. He knew, in the first weeks of April of 2020, that the California Department of Healthcare Services had suspended prior authorization. He knew what that suspension would mean for an independent pharmacy with creative billing practices. He waited 2 years. He built the legal shell. He obtained the pharmacy license through Mikhail. He recruited the nurse practitioner. He opened the doors in February of 2022. He did what he did for 11 months. When the emergency rulemaking expired at the end of April of 2023, he shut the storefront, liquidated most of the inventory, and began dissolving the LLC. He is 66 years old. He lives in a 4,000-square-foot house on a cul-de-sac in Anaheim Hills that he purchased for cash in 2022. He has, in my professional judgment, stolen money from every Californian. He will be sentenced on the 3rd of August of 2026. I do not know what his sentence will be. I know that whatever it is, I am not going to the courtroom. Let me tell you what I am going to do instead. My mother is buried in Greenlawn Cemetery on the east side of Bakersfield, in a section reserved for members of the parish of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The grave is on a small rise. There is a walnut tree about 40 feet away. The headstone is modest. It reads, Rosalba Castro Ibarra, 1959 to 2011, beloved wife and mother, with a line in Spanish below, Descansa en paz. My father visits the grave on the 3rd Sunday of each month. He brings whatever is blooming in the yard. In August, it is zinnias, because my mother loved zinnias. My father plants them along the west fence. Every year, after the plants die back in late October, he saves the seed. Every spring, he sows them fresh. The zinnias in the garden in August of 2026 are descendants of the plants my mother planted in 1993. On the 3rd of August, 2026, at around 10 in the morning, Paul Randall will be sentenced at the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in Santa Ana. At around the same time, I will be at my father's house in Bakersfield. We will eat a breakfast of eggs and corn tortillas and black coffee. After breakfast, we will drive the 3.5 miles to Greenlawn Cemetery. I will take one cut zinnia from the west fence. I will walk up the small rise to my mother's grave. I will stand there for 3 minutes. I will lay the zinnia on the stone. I will say a short prayer in Spanish. Then I will walk back to the car, and my father and I will drive home, and we will sit on the back patio, and he will tell me about the garden. I will not tell him about the sentencing. I will not tell him about the dossier. I will not tell him about Paul Randall. I will not tell him about the drawer in the records room. I will not tell him about Gregor Hanneman. I will not tell him about Ashanti Bermudez Yoon. I will not tell him about the stapler. He does not need to know those things. He needs to know that his daughter drove down from Fresno, and that she came to the cemetery with him, and that the zinnias he planted from my mother's seed bloomed beautifully this year. Some people believe that when something wrong is made right, there is a moment of triumph. I do not believe that. The wrong that was made right here involved 38 specific fraud counts, a guilty plea, a federal prison sentence, and the return of approximately $178 million, of which perhaps $90 million will actually be recovered after the completion of the bankruptcy proceedings and the disposition of the seized assets. The wrong that was made right did not involve the return of my mother's life, or of the lives of the many Californians who were told, over the 11 months when Monte Vista was billing, that they needed to pay more for the same copayment, or that their pharmacy network had narrowed, or that a particular drug had moved from the formulary to the non-formulary tier because the Medi-Cal program had an unexpected budget shortfall that year. All of those things were downstream of what Paul Randall did. None of them can be unwound. The wrong that was made right in the end was small. I read a pattern in a dispensing log. I wrote a memorandum. The memorandum was filed in a drawer. I wrote a longer report. The longer report was filed in the same drawer. I carried a dossier in a cloth tote bag from the FedEx office on J Street in Sacramento to a conference room in the Santa Ana Federal Building. I answered questions from an assistant United States attorney for 3 hours and 45 minutes. I took a transfer to Fresno I did not ask for. I returned a stapler to a colleague. 18 months later, 3 people pled guilty. 11 months after that, a sentencing will happen, and I will be in a cemetery 220 miles north with my father, placing 1 zinnia on a small grave. I did not do this for recognition. I have not received any. The Department of Justice will not name me. The Attorney General's office will not name me. The Department of Healthcare Services will not name me. The Board of Pharmacy will not name me. The press will not name me. My own father does not know. My own colleague Margaret, who shared a stapler with me for 10 years, does not know, unless she has guessed, in the way colleagues can guess. I am not going to tell her. The work is not mine in that sense. The work is the state's. The methodology belongs to Margaret, who wrote the original SAS procedures in 2014. The referral path belongs to Ashanti, who wrote the memorandum to the Special Prosecutions Unit. The legal authority belongs to the California Attorney General and to the United States Attorney for the Central District of California. The recovery belongs to the taxpayers of California. The names of Paul Randall and Carolus Ramses Mikhail and Patricia Joan Anderson will be in the public record forever. My name will not. That is the arrangement. I accepted it when I took the position in 2012, and I accept it now. The reason the state employs people like me is that the people who take my position do not need their names in the paper. If you need your name in the paper, you should not work for the state. If you can live without your name in the paper, the state will give you a cubicle, a computer, a database, a pension plan, and the quiet privilege of catching a pattern that nobody else would bother to look at because it sits inside a drawer marked pending. That privilege is enough. It is enough for me. I want to say one more thing, and then I want to stop, because I do not want to keep explaining myself past the point at which explanation becomes complaint. The prior authorization requirement for specialty pharmaceutical products was reinstated in the state of California on the 1st of May, 2023. In June of 2026, the California legislature passed Senate Bill 474, authored by a senator from East Los Angeles whose own mother, as it happens, had died of breast cancer in 1997 after a prior authorization delay. Senate Bill 474 is titled the COVID Emergency Regulatory Window Safeguards Act. It requires, among other things, that during any future state of emergency, whenever a state agency temporarily suspends a pre-existing prior authorization, cost containment, or review requirement for any healthcare service, the agency shall simultaneously establish a parallel, real-time anomaly detection workflow, funded at a minimum of 1% of the projected quarterly expenditure under the suspended requirement, and reporting directly to the Attorney General through the agency's General Counsel, bypassing the regular operational chain of command, and publishing a quarterly summary to the legislature. The bill passed with bipartisan support. The governor signed it on the 14th of July, 2026. I read about it the morning after at my kitchen table in Fresno. I drank my coffee. I ate a piece of dry toast. I went to work. The drawer in the records room on the ground floor of Building B6 has, I am told, been removed. The physical records room is being modernized. All historical hard copy files are being scanned and indexed into a searchable digital archive. The modernization was announced 3 months after the unsealing of the Monte Vista indictment. I do not know whether the two things are related. I suspect that they are. The red ink stamps that said "Post-Emergency Review" and "Pending Window Closure" are, I am told, being retired. A new stamp has been designed. It reads, "Priority Technical Review." It is blue. I have not seen one in person. I will not see one because the Fresno satellite office does not use the centralized records room anymore. The modernization is meant to prevent what happened with my report from happening again. I do not know if a stamp will be enough. I know that the underlying problem is not the stamp. The underlying problem is that inside any institution of sufficient age, there will always be, at any given moment, a Gregor Hanneman. It is not the stamp that locks the drawer, it is the person who decides when the drawer opens. A statute that bypasses the operational chain of command is a stronger intervention than a new stamp. I am glad the legislature wrote one. I hope the legislature will protect it. I hope some other auditor, in some other emergency, 20 years from now, will be able to walk her dossier up to her general counsel and watch it move without having to schedule an interview with a deputy attorney general 6 weeks later and drive 7 hours down Interstate 5 with a briefcase on the passenger seat. I am not going to drive down Interstate 5 for the sentencing. I am going to drive a shorter distance to the south side of Bakersfield, where my father's zinnias are blooming. I am going to stand at my mother's grave for 3 minutes. I am going to lay down one flower. I am going to tell her, silently, in a language that is neither English nor Spanish, but belongs only to the two of us, that there is a woman named Patricia Anderson who did something wrong for money she needed, and that there is a man named Kyrillos Mikhail who did something wrong for money he needed less, and that there is a man named Paul Randall who did something wrong because he had seen the shape of an opportunity from the inside of the industry that created it. I am going to tell her that Patricia Anderson's daughter, who is 22 years old, will finish community college this spring and will probably be all right, because the sentence her mother will serve is shorter than the sentence her father's depression served, and because the house they live in will probably be sold at a loss, but will still settle the mortgage. I am going to tell her that Kyrillos Mikhail's daughter Sarah, who is a senior at the University of California, Irvine, will graduate in the spring, and that I hope she will go to law school, because I think a good lawyer in the Central District of California might come out of a family that has understood, from the inside, what the difference between a shortcut and a crime looks like. I am going to tell her that Paul Randall has a wife, Margaret Randall, who did not know about the scheme, who has filed for divorce, who will sell the Anaheim Hills house at the top of the market, who will move back to Ohio where her older sister lives, who will be 71 years old when her ex-husband is released from federal custody, and who will have already made peace with the fact that she will probably not live to see him at the visitation window. I am going to tell my mother all of those things. I am going to tell her I am sorry it took 18 months of silence after the dossier was delivered, before the first indictment was unsealed, and that I am sorry for the $178 million that California paid before I understood I was going to have to walk around Gregor Hanneman, and that I am sorry for every person whose prior authorization for a specialty oncology drug was delayed in 2022 and 2023 because the Medi-Cal budget was strained that year by the drain that Monte Vista was putting on it. I am going to tell her one more thing. I am going to tell her that I saw the window. I am going to tell her that I did not wait for it to close on anyone else. I am going to tell her that the pattern can be read, and that it will be read again, because somebody has to stand in the room with the cabinets and look at the numbers, and the person who stands in that room does not need her name in the paper. I am going to tell her that I learned that from her. I am going to tell her that I love her. I am going to walk back down the small rise. I am going to drive home with my father, and on Monday, I am going to go to work at the Fresno satellite office, and I am going to run the monthly outlier report, and I am going to look at the 23 rows, and I am going to read the pattern. That is the arrangement. That is what I do. My name is Lillian Castro. That is all.